Yeah. Right. So, Hare Krishna, everybody. Thank you very much for coming to this presentation. As I mentioned yesterday, today's presentation will be on evolution theory. How many of you have heard about evolution? Okay, yeah. As I was explaining it to a devotee yesterday, evolution theory has been that pebble in the shoe for us in ISKCON for a long time. It's like, well, we don't completely agree with it, but we don't know much of it, and we know that Prabhupada, wasn't very keen on it, and so like. But besides that, it's like everybody else in the world accepts it as truth, and it's like, so how do we understand it? There was just to give you some context. This is a report on a small workshops that we held in Gainesville, Florida, in June of this year, and also later in Wales in July, with a few devotee scientists. We came together and said, okay, let's talk about evolution. This was co-sponsored by the Temple of Vedic Planetarium and by the Bhaktivedanta Institute for Higher Studies. That's what I'm linked to. This was the first time that devotees were coming together to discuss this important topic of evolution. Previous to it, there had been just like devotees here and there, just like researching by themselves and trying to, write some books or give some presentations about it. But there wasn't like a consensus where it's like, okay, let's sit down and talk about what can we say about evolution. What are the things that we agree with evolution theory, and what are the things that we do not agree with? Same thing with intelligent design. And is there anything that the Bhagavatam says that can bring in new aspects to this? So this was like very momentous in that sense. Among the devotees that were attending, you might know Drutakarma Prabhu, Michael Cremo for Forbidden Archaeology, and also Lalitanath Prabhu, Leif Johnson, Rethinking Darwin. His book is just out here, by the way. So these were some of the devotees that were there. Now, what is some of the motivation? Well, as I was explaining, very limited has been done for many years in terms of evolution theory. We have had mostly a few books here and there that have been written by devotees who have just taken up the research by themselves, saying like, well, nothing is being done. Let me do something on it. For the most part, but for the most part, it hasn't been done by professional scientists, like by biologists, by archaeologists, by zoologists. It has been mainly by devotees that just go like, well, let me just see what others have written about it, and let me write about it in terms of the Vedic perspective and things like that. So this was a request from the TOVP. Also, the Temple of Vedic Planetarium, has a science part of it. There's a planetarium. The West Wing is going to house a museum, and in that museum, there's going to be 3 tiers. The first tier is going to talk about consciousness. The second one is going to talk about life, and part of it is going to be evolution. And the third part is going to be on cosmology. So they were saying, like, can you help us, in these topics? And then we said, okay, sure. Especially, we were thinking the topic that we know least amount on is evolution theory. In terms of the cosmology, something has been done on it. But in evolution theory, it was like what can we say? What can we do in there? So this was like a priority for us. Let us see what we can come up with in terms of what to say, what to express. This is also a way for us to create material for gurukuls and brahmacharya ashrams, especially in places like the Bhaktivedanta Manor in the UK. They were asking, like, we have a lot of book distributors, And these devotees, they want to go out and they want to interact with people who are smart. And sometimes these questions come about evolution theory when they're selling books, and it's like, what do we say about it? So this was, and also in gurukuls, what devotees have been seeing is that sometimes in trying to like push back on this scientism, some of the kids are coming to school already with the ideas that we are against science. And so they don't even want to learn science. So as a movement, it's not very good to have devotee children already predisposed saying like, I don't want anything to do with science. We're against scientism, not science. So, okay, how can we address the issues that these kids are coming in? And later on, when they grow up, and what we're saying is that these young kurukulis, they're about to go out into the world. They have been growing up with a certain faith, and they want to believe that what they have been taught is true. But then, then there's like all this evidence from science about this other narrative. So, how do I put these two things together? They want to be devotees, but this first has to connect for them to like fully give themselves. And then this is also a way to inspire new generations of scientist devotees. We need devotees in all realms. We need artists, we need cooks, we need housewives, and we need scientists, among all the many things. And part of this is like, okay, get involved, basically. Try, if your passion is science, get into science and do something for Prabhupada. So here's my outline for today. I'll begin by giving you a little bit of the evolution narrative, just to get us into context. What is the story behind evolution? How does it, what are the main, the key elements to it, the talking points? And then how does intelligent design, because that's the other big player here, right? How do they respond to evolution theory? Because it has been seen that a lot of people are not very much interested in having that evolution narrative, so they go with the intelligent design. Then we will go into what is the Bhagavatam's version of all this? What does Bhagavatam have to say about evolution? And specifically then, Srila Prabhupada commenting on evolution. After that, we'll try to see how to create a new narrative. And with that narrative, how do we enter into a dialogue that is already going on, especially between the evolutionists and the intelligent designers. And finally, some action items that were done, that were proposed for us to do over the next couple of months. So what is the evolution narrative? The theory in a nutshell is that there are accidental mutations in every individual. Every time that an individual is born, there are different things in the DNA that are just slightly different, some mutations. And some of these mutations are more advantageous for the survival in a specific environment. So maybe it is somebody might be a little bit more heat resistant, or might have a longer neck to reach certain fruits, or it might be that they are able to jump a little bit higher. And in the specific environment, then these individuals with the more advantageous mutations, they get to survive somehow or other. That is how they explain, well, why is it that people in Africa have darker skin? Well, because with a darker skin, it doesn't, they're better able to take in the sun, which, if somebody from Sweden went to there, they'll just get sunburned in 2 minutes, right? So they're able to survive, they procreate, and while those without the mutations, they perish. This is called the natural selection, or survival of the fittest. And what is seen is that, well, what is expected is that after a long period of time, if you accumulate these mutations, they eventually create a new species. So this is the evolution narrative, in a nutshell. But this is a theory of debate. Ever since the very beginning, ever since Darwin put it down, immediately he started a debate among all the people there. In Darwin's time, when he first proposed it, not just like the religious groups, but also the other scientists that were at that time, they believed in a natural theology. And so for him to say that, no, like, this is all due to natural phenomena, natural laws, and God has nothing to do with it. Maybe God is at the beginning, but here, the whole process is completely natural. Was a big statement. And the biggest debate at that time was, is this the case for humans? Did humans actually evolve from animals? They were not so much like, okay, fine, so this animal turns in, these animals come all like that. But did we humans, and notice like taking, they don't have the idea of reincarnation, right? So it's like, I am a human, right? And did I, as a human, come from these? Is that possible? So that was a big deal, and so it continued on, and people were slowly took to it, especially because of the ability to do more research on this, while there was not so much research that could be done, at least in the way that they were pursuing that natural theology previously. Darwin's contempt at God is, how could a rational, all-loving God create such an unimaginative, violent world? This was a big thing. Remember that at that time when Darwin proposed this, the church, the Protestant church, had completely separated itself from the Roman Catholic. They had said, we don't accept the authority of the church. Anybody who wants to understand God can do it by themselves. They just need to take the Bible and read it themselves, right? They don't need somebody else to interpret it for them or anything like that. So that was okay, but then how do you keep all this? And anybody can read anything, right? Especially if you know about the Vedas, you can read anything in the Vedas. What is the joke? Tell me whatever you want to do, and we can find a quote in some shloka that will allow you to do it. So the same thing in the Bible. You can read anything you really want to it in it. So they were saying, like, how are we going to keep the people together? So they did it was through this natural theology. They were saying, like, well, look at nature. Look how perfect nature is. Look at how the eye works and how the systems. It's like so perfectly in tune. Everything like the ecology. How this definitely has to show that it's something from God. God. There has to be a God that created all this, and he must be an all good, perfect, rational God. And for many years, this was the idea that they had, of how to preach at the to the congregation. This is how we natural laws of God is how we understand that God exists. But then Darwin is saying, like, well, look at how violent nature is. Parents eating their children. These or mates, killing each other and things like that. It's like extremely violent. It's a violent world. what kind of all good God would create this? And he said, and he's so unimaginative. He said that there's so many types of birds, right? But many of them look like each other. Like, why didn't he just like make like completely different types? Why are there like this one that looks so much like this one, which looks so much like this one? It's like, it's very unimaginative. So he was angry at God. And he didn't say necessarily that there was no God, but he pushed him back as far as possible. Okay, well, maybe he created all of this. Maybe, who knows about the origin of all this. But from that point on, everything has been natural. And so if you push God back far enough, then you can forget about him, basically. And this is something important to understand, is that the origin of life is related to the origin of the species, but it is not the same. Here in this vignette, Darwin had to reevaluate his theories when he witnessed God in action on the other side. And then you see God saying, and then the thingy just needs an ear here. Looks hilarious, heh. Intelligent design. So this is the other perspective, right? Some people don't like the idea that, well, this whole thing of the evolution looks very much like hand wavy, in some sense. And they propose that, some things, they do look like, it's not the same. If the quintessential example is, if you're going down a beach and you see a pile of sand, you go like, well, it could have been made by the waves. You see maybe some lines like this on the sand, and you go, well, it could have been made by the wind, right? But if you find a watch, you can't say like, well, maybe the silicon in here, it came together through different forces, and it formed in such a way that it created gears that fit perfectly within each other, and the quartz, it acted as a timekeeper for all of this. Yeah. So it perfectly natural to find it there, right? It just took a long time for it to get there. So that's when you find a watch, what they're saying is you have to acknowledge that this was something that was purposefully created by an intelligent designer, not just some random cause. And they say that how to tell if something is an intelligent design? Well, first there is the inference to best explanation. Well, as I just said, it is just natural to say that, if you find a watch, that it is made by an intelligent designer, rather than saying like, let me try to concoct some really weird way of saying how that watch got there. The other one is irreducible complexity. Is the idea that some things are just so complex that it doesn't matter how you try to create. There is just no way in which it could have come to being in any other way that already complex. So if you saw, you've probably seen some of these examples where it's like, well, how is it possible that this could exist by or could it have gotten there just by evolution? It's not possible. It's so complex that there's no way to do it. And the example is the mousetrap, right? The mousetrap is very simple. It has a base, it has a catch here, then there is a hammer, the spring, and the holding bar. If you take out any of these pieces, the trap will not work, right? So how could it have gotten to this stage? If you try to say like, well, maybe first of all there was like a hammer that didn't work really well with a base, and then suddenly it developed like a spring so that it could go. It just doesn't work. You have to have the whole thing or nothing. And there are no in-between steps to this. You can't think of any, it has to work right from the very beginning. And so this is the irreducible complexity. There's a further argument, which is the specified complexity, and is that there is a purpose behind the complexity, because there are many things in nature that may be complex, but you could still say, well, it could still be made, by natural forces. It just, became very complex. But when it has like a specific purpose to it, like the mousetrap, it has the specific purpose of catching the mouse. It has no other. So then you talk about an intelligent design. And an example of this that they've been seeing, and this is the prototypical example, is when you get the bacteria, you notice that the bacteria have like a little flagellum at the end with which they swim. Now this little, simple flagellum, you could, if you look at it, it's really a rotor that works with protons. It's crazy. And the different parts that it has, like the different S rings, the inner membranes, the stators, and everything that just needed to make it go around like that. You go like, wow, that's extremely complex, and it's very specific for a purpose. So how could it have evolved into that? There are some ways that scientists have now tried to come up to say, like, this is how it got there, but this has been like one of those quintessential examples of intelligent design by irreducible complexity. Now, some of the arguments, like the irreducible complexity and also the punctuated equilibrium. Well, let me explain this punctuated equilibrium. What they were saying is that in the soil, when you look at the different geological eras by the strata like that, you find that you don't have like these gradual changes from one species to another. You just find like there's a species here and there's like a completely this species here and like that. There's no transitions between the species. So that is called punctuated equilibrium. This, along with the irreducible complexity, these arguments were put forward during Darwin's time by the scientists, and these scientists were not religious. Those were the very first arguments that they said, look, your theory is sort of nice, but we have problems with this. And Darwin at that time, he said, yeah, these are very good points. But in time, my theory will develop, and you will see, how, we're able to answer these questions. What happened was that later on, the people who were putting forward these arguments, they died out. Their students, they just continued on with Darwin's theory, which offered more possibilities of research at that time. And people that later on, like Michael B. and other people from the intelligent designers, they just took different forms of these irreducible complexity and punctuated equilibrium, different arguments that were just like very similar to those, different versions of it. These arguments are still valid. It's not that they're not valid, but the problem with them is that they have lost reputability among the scientists because of the religious context. Especially in America, there was like a strong movement by the fundamental Christians, where they were going like, no, we don't accept evolution at all, and in our classrooms we're only going to be teaching the Bible and things like that. And so the scientists and the Christians were really very much at odds there. And so anytime that anybody brings up things like punctuated equilibrium or irreducible complexity, in the context of intelligent design, it's like immediately like, no, we don't want to have anything to do with this. Now,
is there a way to get around it? Just not call it something else. If you say intelligent design, you would think of a Christian who thinks the Earth is 4,000 years old and it's incredibly, I wouldn't say stupid, but not open to intelligent thought.
Yeah, well, that's a very good question. Can we call it something else? That was one of the questions that we had. I'll try to address it a little bit further on, but just to answer your question right now, it's a good question whether just calling it something else would be something. One of the things that Litanath Prabhu pointed out is that you know, people can tell. You know, if scientists can smell intelligent design. And as soon as they do, you know, they'll just like shut off and say like, you know, hey, you know, your intelligent design, I don't want to have anything to do with this. So maybe calling it different might not be enough. We have to do something more to it. But it's a good question. So one of the common responses to these arguments are, where engineers see design, we biologists see natural selection. So immediately it's like, yeah, it might look like design, but we really take it as natural selection. Okay, you know, I mean, how can you respond to that? Yes?
Actually, your question is in line with what I've been thinking all along now, is how can these people still seriously say this? Because as you have pointed out, more and more research is showing the complexity that is needed to keep things working. Like this, you mentioned this rotor. So like they have studied now, like for just a simple example, the process of giving birth. You know, a mother giving birth to her child, all the hormones that are needed at each step of this delivery, it's extremely complex. And now they're figuring all these things out. How can they still say the same stuff that they've been saying, I don't know, that it is 100 years ago or longer? So
yeah, 1800s.
Yeah, so how can they still maintain the same ridiculous idea when at the same time they're figuring out that everything clearly has intelligent design? Maybe they're allergic to the word, but how do they explain all these things?
Well, they talk about the scaffold theory, you know. The idea that, well, you know, here's the example that they give. If you see an arch, right, made of stone, if you take any of these stones out, you know, the whole arch will collapse. So the only thing that you say is like, it had to be put there, you know, in the first place as an arch, right? Well, actually, you know, they say to be able to construct that, you first have to put a scaffold where you put everything like that, and then you take out the scaffold, and then it's perfect like that. So there may have been like different processes, different things along the way, you know, that we're not seeing nowadays, and that maybe in the future we'll be able to find out better, you know, like how this actually came about by doing that and finally got to where it is.
Intelligent design, right? I mean,
no,
somebody
it's a natural. It's saying that there were natural processes that created this scaffold, and you know now it has been taken out, so we don't see like where it came from necessarily.
Yeah, but if you say a car, the engineer made a car, or he's a natural process, you can say, because I mean, so I mean, ultimately there is intelligence behind it. Otherwise, I mean, do they agree to these three? How you say? Requirements for intelligent design, do they agree to these?
No.
Or who put these three criteria?
These are the ones by the intelligent designers. They're the ones that are trying to say like, well, how can we tell if something is intelligent design or if it's something that is just, you know, complex but, you know, just like, you know, made by natural forces, right? So these are arguments that they've tried to like develop, you know, over the years.
Yeah, but still they have a lot of explaining to do. Of like, there's always a male and a female. I mean, in 95% of the species, there's a male and a female, always. Functioning in the same...
there are also species that are, you know, both.
Yeah, there are.
So they can say like, you know, at some point, you know, they just got completely separated. You know, like it decided to be like only one and only one. you stuck to one
But
of
why
them.
would suddenly two come out, and this doesn't make sense? I mean, none of what they're saying makes sense. I'm sorry that I'm putting you in the spot to defend them,
And
but
especially
it just doesn't make sense that they're still believing this. It's like believing in Santa Claus, basically. For intelligent people.
As I explained, they believe that everything can be explained by natural causes.
Yeah, but
And maybe you don't have all the answers right now, but there are things that they will point out, like I just told you, like these species that are both male and female, and that at some point it might have been that you had to just like pick one and that was it. You couldn't change or have both. It just one, and then from that you just had completely male and female, and it went on like that. So that's a possible way in which I can think of.
But that's an additional complexity. Then you would have it the other way around, and maybe 10% would have male and female, and 90% would just not require any additional external source in order to procreate.
It might have been that the conditions during that time, and don't ask me which conditions would those be, but those conditions made it such that you could not, you could only have one or the other. Again, I'm just playing devil's advocate here, in the best way possible. But I'm not necessarily a biologist. I'm just giving you here a little report on this. Yes.
I'm thinking it's two things. I think one thing is you grow up with it. It's what you learn from your little, long before your intellect is there, and it's already established as more or less this is how it is. And then it's the other one. It's not the contrast. You don't contrast a scientist to somebody with an intelligent explanation. You get this fundamentalist. The earth is 4,000 years old. God made it in 7 days. Bam, everything else is the devil. You can't listen to these guys. So what is your alternative? A scientist at least come across as they study, they do research, they're open to new breakthroughs. They're not saying this is absolute, whereas a Christian would say this is absolute, and we have already, and every time they try to go in and compromise with science, then science grows away from them, and then they're stuck on another level of stupidity. So if that's your alternative, you'll have to pick one, and then you meet this religion who said, but how can you say that when God made everything so beautiful? And that just reinforces the fact that we're religious fanatics. So I think it's quite easy to understand unless you have a Vedic kind of thing, or unless you have an intuitive desire to see God. I think it kind of makes sense, even if the details don't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
I think he was actually before me. No, the other person, he was before me.
I think we can look at this in two ways. One, that you can't argue with someone in the mode of ignorance, because they simply just won't accept it. They just don't accept, because they're not bright enough to see from a different angle. And the other thing is that there's an intelligent design going on from the other side. In other words, there's like a conspiracy theory or something like that. So they've got their intelligent design that they won't accept it. They won't accept God, full stop, because they're atheists.
Yeah, so you have on one side people who many times they put the God of the gaps. They try to explain everything to just God, and then it's like, well, how do you that's not scientific. And then how do you prove God? How do you do anything with God there? So there's that problem there. And then you also have, as Mataji and Prabhu was saying, you have then people who have been like bashing that this is there's nothing but this on both sides. So it's a heated debate. Wherever you look at it, it's always a heated debate. Let's see. Where are we? Okay, and one other thing is that arguments on the statistical impossibility are generally brushed off by saying that although it may be highly unlikely, it was still possible and it did happen. So for example, how they ask, well, how did the first living organism come about? Right? The very first self-reproductive organism. Because if you see like what it needs, even the simplest bacteria has a very long DNA. Actually, I think that bacteria have longer DNAs than humans. So You know, how did the first living organism come about? You know, that it was able to reproduce and do all of that, when we see that it's like such a complex machinery in there. And as you were pointing out, things are, the more you look at it, the more complex it is. So the way that they say is like, well, it may have been like very unlikely to have come about, you know, but it's still just like you know, a piece of, you know, different 4 bases that are doing like a binary code in a computer, right? If you just get the right code, then it happens, right? Now it may be very highly unlikely that you know, by just randomness, right? By just randomness, you get the perfect code, but it happened, you know. The possibility is 0,001, but it did happen. So that's why that's how they brush up those arguments on statistical improbability. Sariputta Prabhu, he wrote a whole book on this that was called Mechanistic and Non-Mechanistic Science. And there, especially in the second part, he mathematically proves where he says, okay, you say that it's by chance, let me show you like how unlikely, you know, in the probability distribution, like how unlikely this really is. And he presented this at universities, and, you know, once, you know, one of these professors, he said like, well, what you're saying is true, but, you know, we're okay with it being like very highly improbable. So he said that took the wind out of my sail. Yes, Mr.
There is a chemist who he's James Tour. Have you heard of him?
No.
Because he's arguing and he's actually showing, because he's a chemist synthesist. Because you start out with non-living molecules, and that's his expertise. And he says the biologists, they don't understand this, because he's making these nano cars, small, you know, they're not living, but they're cars. He can move, and and he's showing how you can't get a living cell from dead molecules. And I mean, just very scientifically, just from chemistry, and he says, I'm the one who's actually qualified to speak on this, because biologists, they don't understand, because everything is so complex and they don't understand each other's fields so well. But since he knows chemistry and dead molecules, he step by step, very scientifically sure, just they can't become living organisms.
What is the name of this?
James Tour.
James
Tour.
Tool.
Yeah, he's a professor, and yeah, they are doing incredible things, just, you know, with the molecules and stuff, and nano cars.
So this is one of the things that we want to do with the Bhaktivedanta Institute, and is having different devotee scientists go into these different realms, right? And as you said, you know, sometimes they don't know what each other is doing, but since we have like a worldwide organization like that, part of this is creating databases and platforms where devotees can communicate and show each other the different research that they've been working on. True.
Hare Krishna. First of all, I would like to thank you. You have put a lot of efforts, and I really appreciate that. But I have one question and a couple of comments. Why are we trying to understand spirituality based on science or vice versa? Is the purpose to prove to the scientists that whatever knowledge is there into the Vedic scriptures is even proven by science, and that's why you need to accept the word?
No. Trying to do that is very, very difficult. It's not impossible. What Prabhupada saw, and we will go a little bit more into this, is that scientists, specifically atheistic scientists, they were using science to be able to express atheistic views. And then people come and they take this science and it's like, oh, well, science is true. Science is truth. It goes in, and there's a very specific method, and you can get truth from that. So whatever they're saying must be true. But they were giving their philosophical conclusions, their philosophical atheistic conclusions to this. And that's what Prabhupada said, they're cheating the people. They're telling the people that they are the bodies. And that's what he was against. And so he said, like, we have to show that life comes from life.
Yeah, so those who are neutral, they are neither an atheist nor theist. We are trying to prove an alternative so that they would evolve gradually to the spiritual level and they would not be buying the idea proposed by atheist scientists. That's what the purpose is. Is this correct?
Yes, you want to give an alternative view of these things that allows for the idea of consciousness, of life, of the spirit soul somehow entering into it. So that, if you're able to see that, yes, everything is not just, matter, interacting with matter, but that there's a soul behind it in some way, then you have the possibility. You might not say soul, you might say more something like consciousness. That's a little bit more nuanced, and people, don't get the like, ooh, religion, God, no.
But Prabhuji, okay, I got your point, but see, argument that can be argued in two ways. Mm-hmm. If at all we, being spiritualist, want to propose an alternative view, this so far is good theory. However, what I would
well, I'm just telling what the
I'm
intelligent
not
design
commenting.
is saying.
I
have not yet come to like what we started seeing, from our point of view.
I'm not commenting on anything. My point is that if you read the Ramayana, there is explanation of Rama Setu, okay, mm-hmm. And also there is an explanation of aeroplane Pushpak, which used to expand, shrink, and move as per the direction of the person who is on the driver's seat. And even Ram Setu was not just built on some brick where the name of Lord Ram was written. There were machines used, that's in original Valmiki Ramayana, and that was just built in 18 days. So based on Vedic knowledge, why do not we come up with something concrete project which would be tangible and evident to those who are neutral, instead of just proposing this theory and that theory? That's argument number one. Another, or let us take Vedic astrology. A person who is expert in Vedic astrology would be able to predict based on his knowledge on Vedic astrology as to when would be the next solar eclipse or lunar eclipse, even after 100 years. That's the depth of the Vedic astrology, and that has been proven. Not only 100 years, even 1000 years later, when would be the solar eclipse, and that's proven. That's another argument. Third is, those who are neutral, I doubt to what extent, even if we proposed and we succeeded in proposing our viewpoint, to what extent they would accept. Because, for example, I will give you an example of Buddhism. Almost 1/5 of the population on the planet is Buddhist, isn't it? And the Buddhism, no. Whatever, they are more than, if you look at Southeast Asia, the entire Southeast Asia is Buddhist. Maybe 1/10, okay, but they do not come up with any scientific argument. Still, Buddhism propagated, evolved, expanded, and it is because of the character and influential personality of Lord Buddha himself. So, why do not we channelize our energy, if at all we want to put our viewpoint in building something concrete which is evident, such as Pushpak Plain or Ram Setu?
So if I understand you well, the idea behind all of these projects that you just mentioned, which are all very interesting projects, is to show that there is knowledge in our scriptures that modern science can use in some way, right? Yeah, so that's what we're trying to do. At the Bhaktivedanta Institute, we're trying to show that there is some interesting things. Like, for example, the explanation that I gave you yesterday for cosmology, right? There are just proposing. There are interesting ideas that are here in these scriptures that can lead to new research. And that's exactly what we're doing at the Bhaktivedanta Institute.
Thank you.
Jai.
I don't want to take up more time of your nice presentation, but I just wish to say, you spoke about that we need devotees, and you want to create a center for this science in different fields, and I think that's very good, and it makes me very happy. And I also want to ask, we talked about Christianity, as Christianity is vast, and we also have to remember, yes, there are fanatics, but there are also very highly intelligent Catholic priests, Jesuits, who are researching and have been researching for a long time about evolution and science, and are priests. So my question is, does ISKCON plan to gather knowledge and unite with other religious traditions like Christianity or Islam, which has...
That was one of the big questions that we had, that is why we're considering intelligent design here, by the way, because it's like, okay, these are people that are talking, to the scientists already, from a point of view that it's like, no, we don't think that's the whole story, what you're telling. So what you'll see in the next couple of slides is, our trying to figure it out, how do we interact with them. All right. Speaking about Darwinism, hear no intelligent design, see no intelligent design, speak no intelligent design. See no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. So now we come to the Srimad Bhagavatam's version, right? So is there anything in the Bhagavatam that will allow us to enter into this dialogue, with a fresh perspective, something that hasn't been said before? Well, what about the 8.4 million species? You've heard of that? That we're constantly saying that there are 8.4 million species. Well, it's interesting. Prabhupada quite often quotes it, right? But this verse, and he quotes the verse, Jala Jala Navalakshan, like that. But this verse was not found in the Vishnu Purana or in the Padma Purana, where it is constantly mentioned. Whenever in the purport it says okay, the Jala Jala Navalakshan, then they put Vishnu Purana or Padma Purana. I looked into those Puranas. It's not there. So it's it just says Vishnu Purana or Padma Purana, but it never gives the specific verse. Like in this canto, this, like that. So I was going okay, let me find out which one it is, so that I can get the context of that shloka. That seems to be important, and to see if there are any commentaries by the acharyas. I couldn't find the verse.
Isn't it said in Chaitanya Charitamrita that Lord Chaitanya was telling this knowledge to Sanatana Goswami? This is what I understood.
Sorry?
Yeah, Lord Chaitanya was telling this thing with the different species to Sanatana Goswami.
Yes, but the 8.4 million. I'm talking specifically of... Yeah, okay. He says that there are many species, right? But I'm speaking specifically the breakdown of those 8.4 million. It says that, yeah, there are so many millions of species of plants, so many millions of aquatics, so where does this come from? And when they say humans, 400,000 humans, what do they mean by humans? Right? Do they include the demigods in it, or do they not? Do they include when they say the nagas and like that, the spirits and the pishachas and the gandharvas? Where are all of them in all of this? I couldn't find the verse anywhere. So that's something, to keep in mind. Also, I found in the Sankhya Karika, okay, so this is from the Sankhya school, but something interesting to note is that they talk about 14 species. So there may be more than one way of characterizing species. And they specifically do those 14 species according to the modes of material nature. So this is just a way to say, like, we can look at, again, we can cut the pie in different ways. And I would have liked to see how is that way of the 8.4 million species, but I couldn't find it. Also, one interesting thing about this is that the species in either Bhagavatam or Sankhya-karika, they are defined by the modes of material nature, by sattva, rajas, and tamas. But it is not so clear how fluid they are. It doesn't really say, that so much whether, this species can turn into another species or like that, other than, the sages, when the sages, turn themselves into some, but that's like using mystic power. But how, whether the species, turn into another, it doesn't really say how fluid they are. There is an evolution of consciousness through the species, and that's something that we've heard a lot. Whenever we quote evolution, we say like, oh, it's evolution of consciousness, not evolution of bodies, right? Regarding the origin of the species, we see that it comes from in the Srimad Bhagavatam. The origin of the species comes from Lord Brahma, and it also comes from Prajapati Daksha, and also from the wives of Kashyapa Muni. Now, when it says that Kashyapa Muni through the womb of his wife, created the birds, and through the womb of this other wife created the reptiles and like that, it's sort of like, how does that happen? How do it sounds kind of like spooky and weird, like that. And Sariputta Prabhu, he gave a possible explanation to this. He said, it may be possible that the sage with the wife turned into that species. Then they had sexual union, and then the wife had that egg or whatever like that in that species, and then they turned back into humans. So that's a possible way in which they could have created these different species, in a way that makes sort of like sense.
So now we know which came first, the bird or the egg.
Yes, now we know which came first, the chicken or the egg. Perfect. It is solved. Also, something interesting is that the creation of the species is done by different methods. Sometimes it's by the power of the mind. Lord Brahma and Prajapati Daksha in the beginning, they both created the species by that power of the mind. But also it is said that it is done by sight, by touch, and then finally by sexual intercourse. And it is actually by this sexual intercourse that it finally, it went on at a rate that they were happy with. Because up to that point, it was like, there's not enough bodies for souls to take birth into this world. When they started with the sexual intercourse, then, wow, okay, finally, there's enough bodies everywhere. The mechanisms, something to note here is that the mechanism is not so important for the commentators. I went through some of the commentaries of the acharyas to see, can you give me a little bit more insight into how they're creating these species? How did it happen? What was but they just go like, oh yeah, it's the sages, they're mystical powers. It's okay, it's like, but at least it seems that at that time it was not such a big deal, to find out what the mechanism is, as it is right now for us, because for science, mechanism is important. Speaking about the origin of life, the origin of life is one of the great outstanding mysteries of science. Paul Davies. This is, he is a physicist, and he has written about, some of this. it is a big mystery, and it's something that we have to research on. Right now, they say that they don't know whether, well, in terms of this chicken and egg, they say we don't know which came first, the DNA or the RNA. It seems like one needs the other, and so it must have come somewhere in there from someone, but they don't know yet how it could have gone. The RNA is, well, there are 3 types of RNA, but RNA is what helps the DNA be able to split and carry the information so that it can make proteins afterwards. So, but it's just half a strand of a DNA, sort of, if you want to put it. Yeah, good enough explanation there. Now, what about Srila Prabhupada on evolution, right? What does Srila Prabhupada have to say on all of this? Well, as we have seen, most of the statements attack scientism. That is to say, the idea that only science can explain the world. The atheistic conclusions, not the theory itself. Prabhupada was not so keen on going against scientists as much as about their scientism. So that's a very important thing. So we're not anti-science, we are anti-scientism. Some statements reflect the limited information that he was given by his non-expert disciples. Many times, when they were telling Prabhupada about something, you could see that Prabhupada was commenting on it, but the disciples, they were not experts at what they were explaining to Prabhupada. So we hear Prabhupada saying, like, we didn't come from monkeys. Yes, of course, and no scientist will ever tell you that we came from monkeys. They will say that we came from a common ancestor. So this shows that the information he was given was by some disciple that, didn't really know the theory that well. In fact, this happened not only with evolution, but it happened, what was the name of that book? Can't remember right now. It's one of the books that was published where Prabhupada was commenting on all the different philosophical theories.
Spiritual dialect.
Sorry? The spiritual dialect?
Dialectism or something like that.
Yes. So it is said that at the beginning, the disciples went and said, like, okay, Prabhupada, this is what so-and-so said about this topic. This is what so-and-so. And then he commented on all of that. And then sometime later they said, oh, Prabhupada, well, we saw that, that these statements were like not so precise, they didn't really, reflect the thought of this person. So they did it once again. But then and he commented on all that. And then they saw that, well, it's still not, not really representative of what these people were saying, but he was like, okay, no more. So that also happened in terms of the Big Bang, and it also happened in terms of the evolutionary theory. So many of these statements that we see from Prabhupada, we have to put it into that context. That is, like, the disciples are not giving him the nuances, and he is just commenting on what the disciples are saying. Also, arguably, his strongest attacks were aimed at breaking his disciples' blind faith in the temporary conclusions of science that defied the Vedic statements. Prabhupada only had a very limited time on earth, and he knew that. And he was seeing that many of his disciples, they had this blind faith in science, and he had to say, like, okay, that's, it's okay that you believe in science like that, but take the authority of the Vedas. And sometimes to do that, he had to just like be like firm and it's like cutting, like, okay, forget about science, just like take this. In a mood of, you just need, like, first of all, take this to be true, and then see how it could be true with the other thing, but take this to be truth. So sometimes he just had to smash and say, like, no, forget about that other one. And if you have seen the book Life Comes from Life, this is a very famous book that came out in the 80s. No, 70s. in the 70s, I think. Anyway, it was based on conversations of Prabhupada on Venice Beach with his disciples. And, you know, a lot of us have read this book, and where Prabhupada is just like smashing Darwin, you know, kick with boot in the face, like, you know, good brahmacharis there, and sannyasis saying like that. Now, what some devotees started seeing, you know, scholarly devotees, they were looking at it, it's like, wait, hold on a second. Looking at the transcript of the actual conversations and the conversations that they're put here, you couldn't put one and one together. So they went and said, okay, so where you know, where did they come up with the, because it says Prabhupada, and then it quotes, and then, you know, like, you know, this other disciple, and quote. So the quotes in here and the quotes from the transcripts are totally different. So these devotees, they went back and they started looking, and what they saw is that this book was translated from the German, first of all. Leben kommt von Leben. And that book had been compiled by some German disciples that had listened to the tapes and put it into German, and it was also not translated, like it wasn't transcripted like very well. It was just like their imaginative way of expressing, you know, what had been said. And then they translated that into English, and that became that book. So the BBT has now stopped producing it after it was shown, you know, like all of these things. But this shows, you know, how, you know, because these devotees, you know, they put Prabhupada to seem as a very, you know, just like, yeah, you know, like, yeah, we're against these scientists, you know, rascals and you know, like that. Well, Prabhupada, if you see in the statements, the actual statements, he was more nuanced philosophically. He knew how to make those nuances. So, what is Prabhupada's real mood? Towards this? We actually see that some statements reflect Prabhupada conceding that species may have appeared after a partial dissolution in a manner explained by evolutionary theory. I'll show you some quotes of that in a second. This is reminiscent of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. We see Bhaktivinoda Thakur in some of his books actually saying like, well, yeah, the age of the universe according to the Vedas could have been 4,000 years, as the Christians say it. Remember, he was back in the time when the Christians were strong there. So he was trying to concede that, yeah, it could have been like 4,000 years, so he adjusted it like that. And that the different, you know, the hells and the heavens like that might have been, you know, like more poetic or not so literal. So what you're seeing is that Bhaktivinoda Thakur is doing adjustments so that he can bring forward a specific point about Krishna. He's trying to talk to these intellectuals of his time in the 1800s that were very much into the Christian Bible thing. And he made some adjustments just so that he could get his point across of Krishna being the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Now, is that how we should take these comments of Prabhupada? Or should we find it, you know, or can we take them literal when he's talking about, you know, yeah, life could have come from an evolution? I don't know. That's something that we have to look about. I tried to look into the previous Acharya's commentaries to see if there's anything that they had to say about, you know, this evolution, but I couldn't find anything. Prabhupada just spoke on it, basically. Yes, Vatsali.
I think we have to do it on all the levels, because when Prabhupada responds to the disciples' understanding, then he basically responds to the understanding of the general public as well. So that is valid. And the fact that he created the Bhaktivedanta Institute, or I don't know, inspired it or however he did it. It also shows he's prepared to have devotees who can be on the same level of knowledge, because you can't come on as a naive, non-scientific person and actually discuss these topics, because we don't have enough knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
But the main point, I think, is like you speak about scientism. It's a little bit like Mayavad. It infuses the entirety of everyone's consciousness. It makes it hard to take the Krishna consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think one thing goes against the other, because all these levels exist. But I think it's really healthy for us to know that there is a more nuanced way of dealing with it, even if we're not competent to do it ourselves. And that is like every question, as an aspiring Madhyamadikar, you can always say that. I have heard that there are alternatives to your idea, but I don't have the specific facts, so I can't argue your point.
The important thing is to know, to be able to speak on that level. That, sometimes, devotees just want to like again, put in the face kind of thing. And just know that, well, it's not always, we shouldn't always try to go that way, especially with people who are actually learned in these fields and who are intellectuals like that, because they can see the holes in our arguments very easily. Yes.
Prabhupada and Bhakti Thakur, when they spoke about this, they didn't give the right to the scientists about mutation. That's another thing,
Well, they didn't talk about so much mechanism.
No,
They they never get into mechanisms like that.
No.
Let me show you the quotes by Prabhupada here. So this is from the Srimad Bhagavatam, 4th canto, 24th chapter, text 49. Here in the purport, the very beginning of the purport, it says, "This verse gives an idea of the highest perfection of the evolutionary process as described by the Vaishnava poet Jayadev Goswami." And then, let us begin tracing the evolutionary process from the point of devastation, pralaya. When the whole universe is filled with water, at that time there are many fishes and other aquatics. And from these aquatics evolve creepers, trees, etc. From these, insects and reptiles evolve. And from them, birds, beasts, and then human beings. And finally, civilized human beings. Now the civilized human beings is at a junction, and then he keeps on going, about the importance of human life. But do you see he's talking here about, a history that is very much like what the narrative of the evolutionary process of the scientists. Now this wasn't. So first of all, by the way, this is a purport of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So it's something that he put in writing in one of his books, and not just any book, the Srimad Bhagavatam. Here's a room conversation on October 16, 1977, where he says basically the same thing. Prabhupada, life begins from water. Bharadraj, life begins from water? How is that? Prabhupada, just like the sea, and from within the sea, an exhibition of life begins in the form of sea animals, or fish, or similar. Then life develops, evolves, life. Sea does not generate life, but in this material world, life begins from water. Bharadraj. So we will show this. Prabhupada, Kshene punye punar martyalokam vishanti. From the higher planets, they fall down with water. And then again, like bubbles, begins from water, life. As the water dries up, then vegetables. And then, jala jala, navalakshanis, again, Padma Purana, it doesn't say which verse. Then, moving animals and ants, reptiles. In this way, birds, beasts, then four-legged animals, then uncivilized man, then civilized man with Vedic knowledge, then God realization. This is the process. Again, he's talking to Bharadraj Prabhu, who is in charge of, who was in charge of creating the exhibitions for the TOVP. And he is telling him, evolution in some way. Again, as I said, this is how should we take this? Is something to be thought about. Yes, Mataji.
Somewhere also in the Bhagavatam, Prabhupada is explaining that the evolution is not from species; it's the soul's evolution from species to species.
Well,
Wow.
that is not negating this. That is true what you're saying, that the soul goes from species to species. But here Prabhupada is giving a timeline of the Earth's history and how how the species are coming, how they are appearing on Earth, basically. He's saying that this is and this appearance seems to be in line with what the scientists are saying. So in some way, Prabhupada is like trying to combine what the scientists are saying with the understanding of the Bhagavatam. So it seems like it's not necessarily something that has to be like, okay, this or that, but there could be something in between.
Prabhuji, was this verified that is really what Prabhupada said? Because these tapes are not there anymore, right?
Well, you know now that it's, you can look for that room conversation in Vrindavan, October 16, 1977, 36 minutes, 51, so you can go to that tape and listen to it yourself and make sure. The tapes are there, yes, so you can listen to it yourself.
The morning walks also?
Yes, the morning walks are there also. Although I've heard that some morning walks are not there because they just lost the tapes. Like they would take the tapes out of, to do certain things, and they just didn't put them back. And it was like, and the devotees were not so careful, of like who takes out, who takes in, and so some of these tapes may have been lost. What's that?
He comes with a prediction. He says that the evolutionary theory will be kicked out in 50 years. That's 2023.
Okay. Again, I would.
I read
it's nice. Again, I would look at the actual transcripts to see whether or not it was what Prabhupada said. But if it is so, it would be nice.
This discussion here and the one before it is just how it's written in Srimad Bhagavatam, the same way about evolution. He's not particularly talking about evolution in relation to Darwin's evolution.
No,
he's
just,
speaking
I'm just presenting, what Prabhupada saying something that seems to be in line with the narrative of evolution. Not that he was saying like evolution is true or not. It's just saying that Prabhupada is not completely against the idea of species appearing in this way.
This is just delineating it in the same way that it's delineated
yes.
in Srimad Bhagavatam.
So this is just something to keep in mind. That Prabhupada was not so against the whole idea of evolution.
But what I always wonder is, why do we seem to think that Prabhupada or any pure devotee has all the answers to these things when their service is bhakti, so to speak? They're pure because they're giving love of God, not that they know every detail of scientific understanding.
Yeah, that is why Prabhupada would take, advice and he would hear what his disciples had to say about these things. He would comment, on the philosophical, theological parts of it. But he didn't go too much into the science because he recognized, he's not a scientist.
So if we take it too literal and we go into the nitty-gritty and we can take this statement and make a claim for evolutionary theory, but actually it's just...
What I said, if you saw what I said previously to this,
yeah.
We don't know at this moment how literal we should take this.
Yeah, I'm getting
that
point.
So
yeah.
we just say that, okay, here's a statement, and it's something that we have to keep in mind when thinking about what Prabhupada said about on evolution. How literal or how adjusting Prabhupada is, that's something that will have to be developed later on. Let me continue a little bit more because we're running out of time. Here's a little cartoon. How life on Earth really got its start. Zog's biomedical waste disposal. So creating a new narrative. Now let's see how, you know, how we can move forward, right? Well, most of us, I'm just going to say here, like, most of us do not agree with a totally mechanistic explanation for the origin of life. Krishna is seen as the origin of everything. Life comes from the soul, which is eternal, a part of Krishna, and the Prajapatis are the origin of the species. But this origin of this species from the Srimad Bhagavatam can only be introduced once the demigods and their place in the universe within the facilitation of experiences is explained. You cannot just say to people, like, okay, the origin of life is, you know, Prajapatis. Like first of all, it's like, who are the Prajapatis? What are they doing like that? So you have to explain, you know, like, what is the role of the demigods within the material creation? You know, they are there to facilitate experiences for the living entities to do that. And part of this is the different bodies. So they are in charge of creating these different bodies, and they have, you know, these powers. And these powers are not magical. They're just subtle energy that we can explain, you know, through the elements, as we saw that yesterday, handling them in different ways. So all this context has to be given to understand this new narrative. Now, reconciling differences with the given evidence. The big picture of paleontology is a problem for us because of the Bhagavatam stories. The way that they describe, unless you take it like Prabhupada does, you know, trying to like adjust here and there. Generally, it's a problem. Dhruva's kingdom, one way that we can also like try to think about this is that Dhruva's kingdom is not visible to us, right? So, and Mount Meru is also not visible to us. So there's a lot of things that, well, maybe here on what we see of Earth, life may have begun in that way, or seen to have come in that way, but maybe in the rest of the universe, it was just like spontaneous. And just what we were seeing is this gradual process. Maybe that's one way to look at it. And so the species may or may not have seemingly appeared in the manner explained by evolutionary theory. However, we do say that the species always exist. And so how can we interpret this? Well, there are two ways that we saw that you can interpret that the species always exist. One is that they always exist somewhere in the universe, right? So where are the dinosaurs? You know, one way to think about it is like, well, they're somewhere elsewhere in the universe, right? Or another way is that they're in a potential form that will manifest only when the right conditions and karma exist for a soul that, you know, has to have a Tyrannosaurus Rex body. You know, then when those conditions and karma, you know, appear, then, you know, the dinosaur will appear. But it's always potentially there. And we also have the idea of Sariputta Prabhu's Bija theory, that he said that this potential form could be in the form of a seed. In the Sankhya Karika, they talk, sorry, not Sankhya Karika, was it? It's in the Yoga Sutras. They talk about how there's like these seeds that fructify when living entity is just taking birth in a new body, and you know, and he or she develops this new body. So it's very much like Sariputta Prabhu's Bija theory. An idea is like a virus, resilient, highly contagious. The smallest seed of an idea can grow, and it can grow to define or destroy you. This is a quote from Inception, an awesome movie, by the way. Now, there's systems biology. Not all scientists are completely like, okay, you know, evolution is totally the way, the light, and the truth. You know, nobody goes to the publishing except through us, like that. There are some scientists that are starting to shift the way in which biology is looked at. This is systems biology, where they're looking at things like the idea that these accidental mutations or natural selection is not the only drivers of evolution. An example for here is they have a bacteria, and they just knock down the gene to be able to create a flagellum. So they created these bacteria that grew without a flagellum, and they just left them to starve there, without being able to move. In a matter of days, they grew up a new flagellum. And they said, like, how is that possible? Like, the gene, we knocked down the gene to create a flagellum. Well, what they did is they hot-wired, their DNA, so that in a path that was made to regulate nitrogen or something like that, they used that to be able to get to create the flagellum. And they did this within days, not within billions of years. So this is trying to show that, wow, first of all, mutations and like really big mutations can happen in really fast, much faster than we ever thought. And second, it is also showing us that the DNA is not the one that is telling everything what to do, right? But here's the organism desiring to live and doing something with the DNA. So the DNA is seen like as a toolbox rather than the driver of things.
And it really seems to tell us we don't know everything. Right?
Yes, and we don't know everything. So this is giving us the possibility of proposing that consciousness or personal desire is a strong driver of evolution, not just the impersonal foreign ideas of passing the genes. Like the selfish gene, what is the point of evolution? To pass on your genes. It's like, not really, We can propose that there are drivers like Satchitananda, drivers of survival, that, you want to survive, drivers for knowledge, and drivers for pleasure. And these ideas are much more, they're more intuitively satisfying to see as something that could drive evolution, right? Than just this, I want to pass on my genes. Let's see.
Because that theory is also a little bit like when they make Disney movies, they make the animal act like humans. And here they try to make the evolution and the genes act like humans also.
Yes.
So it's kind of like they still want to bring in that consciousness and God idea, because you can't really get rid of it. You can't really, put your heart into a theory that is just mechanical chance. It's actually funny.
Yeah. So what this is allowing us is to see the organism as a whole, not just like going down to like these impersonal genes, but now seeing the organism and maybe even consciousness as the one who is driving everything. Consciousness is the driver. The real evolution driver. Don't walk away when I'm talking to you. Now, important research that has to be done for us. How does the DNA become specific body parts? That will go to show how the organism or the desires of the organism as the driver. We can also look into things like epigenetics, which is how our environment influences our genome, to also show how these desires of an organism are as the drivers. We can look at things like punctuated equilibrium, so that we can see how the species are a facilitation of the experiences. The important thing here is that with whatever research we do, we have to understand that we have to learn from the scientists, this new research that is coming out, rather than trying to make straw man arguments. That's what we've been doing. A reflection that one of the devotees said is, imagine that somebody had been studying for 20 years the Bhagavatam without ever hearing from a bona fide spiritual master. and that he would, for these 20 years, he was studying it specifically, just looking for things like logical gaps to like make criticisms on. Would you allow that person to sit on the Vyasa-san? So similarly, scientists, when they hear that, oh, this person has never gone to a classroom, he has not sat on the different classrooms to hear about evolutionary theory from other scientists who have been doing this research and like that. He wants to come and talk to us about evolution and all these things. They would also be like not so inclined to allow such a person to just speak freely about what they think on evolution, even though he may have done tons of research on it. So that's just a reflection for us personally. There are new ideas that are also starting to develop, like the idea that consciousness covers the different degrees in different bodies. In the Vedanta Sutra, for example, we hear that we're afraid of death because we've experienced it before. Now that's an interesting thing to bring out. And also, there's this idea that one of the devotees brought out, which was the guna vector field, to explain the Tanmatras and the Mahabhutas, and how the buddhi is the purpose driver for the gunas. So basically, like how well, let me show you with the next one. He was talking about how these gunas then they can express the 8.4 million species within the guna space, where this is rajas, tamas, and sattva. So you can divide this, and each one of these triangles here is a different species. It's a combination of the different modes, right? Here is the most sattvic species, here is the most rajasic, and here are the most tamasic. And you could say, like, for example, here's the dog jati, the dog species. And within this one, there's like all of the, there's also like a lot of space for different species there. So that's where you have the different dog variations. Some devotees thought, yes, Mataji.
Dog is one species because I mean, this example, because dogs is one species, it's not. Anyway, it doesn't matter in this example.
Yeah, so, we're taking this to be like one species, and the different variations are within it, Again, here you have more sattva, rajas, and tamas, and so some dogs are more sattvic, more tamasic, more like that. So all of these different variations can be in here. Some devotees were saying that, well, you can move from one of these to another. It's fluid. You're approaching more this one. You're approaching more this one, according to your different life experiences. And then afterwards, you jump into the next body like that. Some others were saying, like, no, this is completely, you can move within it, but you cannot cross it, because then you would require a new set of senses. So this just shows that we're starting to think of new theories and mechanisms by which we can explain the species with the use of the three modes. Diplomacy is like jazz, endless variations on a theme. Okay. I'll quickly do this because running over time here. How to enter the dialogue. Some devotees think that we should go strong, kick with boot in the face, and use the intelligent design arguments. Some other devotees are saying, like, no, we're not intelligent designers because the species were not designed at any point in time. They are eternal. Krishna never sat down to think, well, how am I going to create, how am I going to design the species? And also, the fact that the species are constantly being created and destroyed. They were not just like designed and that's it. And there are devotees that are in between these two, the strong and the not so, that say, well, maybe we should use the intelligent design arguments, but we're not sure how we would be able to use them without being labeled as the Hindu Discovery Institute, the Hindu intelligent designers. Furthermore, in speaking about how to enter the dialogue, the consciousness-based evolution models that we started seeing with that Guna triangle and such, they're models that are a way to enter the dialogue in a friendly way, to expand knowledge, not to just debunk theories. So we don't necessarily have to be like, okay, let's debunk evolutionary theory. We can also go in like, let's expand knowledge. But there are different views on how to approach this: a congenial preaching or cutting arguments. There were different action items. There are things that we have to investigate better, and to be able to understand better things. We need to understand evolutionary theory better so that we don't create strawman arguments, and we have to identify the gaps that we were not able to fill with our models. We know that the elephant died when he jumped off the roof, but as for the other guy, it's a mystery. We want to do some research. Final thoughts. Some people like the strong preaching approach, confront evolution. Others prefer a congenial approach. What we see is that there are plurality of views. What we know is that we should look and understand different theories of abiogenesis. That means that how life came before, without, how life comes from not life. We have to understand that better so that we can talk about it better. And show these things at the TOVP and present our metaphysical proposal by saying what we would need to turn it into a science. At this moment, we don't really, with these proposals that I showed you, we don't really have a scientific theory to propose to the scientists. What we have at this moment is maybe more like a metaphysical theory. And we have to understand when we're talking about, when we're giving science and when we're just giving metaphysics. At this moment, we can only make metaphysical statements that are interesting ideas that could turn into science later on. These sessions were helpful, especially to young scientist devotees that were there with us, to see how to apply their previous academic knowledge to Krishna consciousness. That was, to me, like the best thing about all of this. Devotees that were getting inspired, they wanted to do more, they wanted to research, and they said like, yes, I finally found a way in which I can engage in Krishna consciousness. Here is the evolution workshops from Gainesville and from Wales in June and July of this year. Thank you very much. Okay. Sorry.